Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back. Last installment here. Now that we've gone through how you make sugars, let's look at some alternative features that can happen if things change in plants. All right. So if we think back to plants, sorry to jump back like this right away, but plants have an issue because, well, they live outside of water like we do. So plants need to be able to control water loss. So if we look at a leaf here, remember on the underside, it's got these stomata, these little mouths that open and close. The stomata let oxygen out, water out, and CO2 in. Okay, so those three gases pass through the stomata. Now, thinking about this, let's think of what happens on a hot, dry, windy summer day. So if it's really hot and sunny and windy, well, what that can do is draw a lot of water out of a plant. A big oak tree can lose hundreds of gallons of water in a day. So to help reduce water loss, what plants will do is just close their mouths. They close their stomata. So a plant can close a stomata, and that reduces water loss. But then think of what happens. What do plants need in order to perform photosynthesis? They're going to need carbon dioxide. So when plants shut their stomata and cut off carbon dioxide from being able to cut off or reduce carbon dioxide's ability to get inside the mesophyll of the plant, then we can start to have issues. CO2 levels in the plant can begin to drop. Oxygen levels, because the light reactions are still going on and you're splitting water and all that kind of stuff, oxygen levels will go up. So when plants close their stomata on these hot, dry days, their CO2 levels drop and oxygen levels increase. Now that creates sort of a funky scenario because if you remember, there's this enzyme rubisco that takes CO2 out of the air and attaches it to existing molecules. Well, what happens is that rubisco can not only bind with carbon dioxide, it can also bind with oxygen. So when CO2 levels drop, rather than interacting with carbon dioxide, rubisco can actually start to grab oxygen. So what that does is it consumes the extra oxygen and creates these like two carbon molecules, and then the two carbon molecules can be digested in other places. The funky thing about this process, it's called photorespiration. It actually uses ATP. And when it does this, you actually siphon off the carbon from the limited carbon dioxide in other ways. So plants actually end up making less sugar. So almost in some plants, almost half the carbon that they fix gets shunted away. So this photorespiration seems really expensive to plants. Now, why would this happen? There's some thoughts in terms of hypotheses around this that back when photosynthesis evolved, there was hardly any oxygen in the atmosphere. So rubisco could fix CO2, but it could also grab oxygen, but that wasn't a big deal because oxygen levels in the atmosphere were so low. So it wasn't really selected against. So this enzyme still retains its function. Now, why would it still retain that function even if it's metabolically costly? Some people also think that what happens is this prevents the accumulation of some of the products of the light reactions. Some of the products of the light reactions, if they accumulate, can be damaging to the cells. So they think that this is a way for plants to sort of survive without having too much toxic material accumulate. All right, now what we've learned about up to this point are called C3 plants. This is like wheat and soybeans, stuff like that we might find around Indiana. There are other plants that have alternative pathways for carbon fixation, and they do this a couple different ways. The first type of plant we're going to look at are called C4 plants. C4 plants are interesting because, again, concentration of carbon dioxide matters. You need the right concentration of CO2 to enter the Calvin cycle to make sugars. So what C4 plants do is they separate the process of carbon fixation from making sugars. So if you look at the example of a C4 plant, C4 plants, I think this could be like corn, but C4 plants, they have two different cells. Here you have the mesophyll cell and then what's called this bundle sheath cell. So in the mesophyll cell, you take in the carbon dioxide, and instead of it being attached by rubisco right into the Calvin cycle, it attaches to another molecule in a attaches to another four carbon, or creates a four carbon molecule, this oxaloacetate. So that's why it's called a C4 plant. The carbon dioxide is taken out of the air and it attaches to this other organic molecule. So what you can do is make these molecules and concentrate the carbon and then feed that into this other cell so that you have appropriate concentrations of CO2 to power the Calvin cycle. So basically what they do is have separate cells. One cell is for capturing carbon dioxide and producing organic molecules. And then the other cell is for taking those organic molecules and converting that to CO2, which can then go through sort of the traditional Calvin cycle. Now let's contrast this with cam plants. Cam plants, these are like succulents. So if it's something in a desert situation, it's so hot and dry that those stomata have to be completely shut during the day. Otherwise, the plants would lose too much water. So then they open their stomata at night. At night, then they can take in carbon dioxide and then they'll release less water because the sun's gone away. So what cam plants do is they separate carbon fixation from sugar production by time. So C4 plants separate carbon fixation from sugar production by location. Cam plants separate carbon fixation from sugar production by time. So at night, they open their stomata, bring in the carbon dioxide, and attach to these four carbon organic molecules. And then during the day, when there's light energy to power the light reactions and make ATP and ADPH, then enzymes will convert those four carbon molecules to CO2. And again, you can power the Calvin cycle. So those are just a couple of interesting ways that we can make sugars differently than our traditional C3 plants. All right, so big picture, what do we know? What does a plant need? You got to give it water. You got to give it light as an energy source. And we know we got to give it carbon dioxide for carbon. What do plants give us? They give us the food we eat, sugars, and they give us oxygen we breathe. So photosynthetic plants are critical to the existence of life because we can't make ATP without them, right? Because we either eat carbs or we eat animals that eat carbs. So we require photosynthetic organisms because they ultimately capture the light from the sun and turn it into food. And then we consume that food and then we can burn it through cellular respiration to make ATP. So pretty spectacular. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hope you have a great day. Thanks a lot.